Hey everybody, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today on our 2014 Ford E-Series van, we're going to be showing you how to install the etrailer.com Universal Brake Controller Install Kit. But before we get to that, why don't we actually check this out and make sure that it's going to work for you. When it comes to these E-Series vans, people out here are doing a lot of different things with them, mostly work related. And so when people go to put a hitch on, like this one here, they're going to need a way to hook up their trailer. And a lot of these trailers are going to require or have a 7-way round type connector. Some of them will also have the smaller 4-way flat type connector. So with this kit, it's going to give you both of those type of connectors, so you can plug in and get all your turn signals and your lights and all that, and keep you safe and legal. But more importantly, what a lot of people are using these for is to have the ability to use a brake controller, trailer brake controller. And that's exactly what this is going to do. It's going to give you all the necessary components to be able to run your wires up to the front and be able to hook into a brake controller. That way you can send power back out through your connector into your trailer and apply the brakes, helping to bring you to a more safe and predictable stop. This is also going to give you a 12-volt auxiliary power. So let's say if you know, your trailer has some type of battery or something like that, on maybe a dump trailer, this is also going to help keep that battery maintained whenever you're towing it, because if you have it hooked up correctly, you're going to be able to send some of that auxiliary power to the battery on the trailer and help more or less trickle charge it. Something I do want to mention, in order for this to work properly, you are going to need an existing 4-way flat wiring connector. And I believe on most of these vans, you're going to have one there. So, you know, it's definitely worth checking into. If you look under there and you don't have one, a lot of times, you know, you can get other wiring kits right here from eTrailer that'll plug into your tail lights and provide you with that connector. So that's something I do want to mention. And also a bracket. So they give you a bracket to mount up this stuff, but not to actually get it attached to the hitch per se. So I just use what's called the no drill short bracket. It clamps on around there and allows me to hook everything up. But other than that, at the end of the day, if you're looking for a 7-way that gives you pretty much all the stuff you're going to need to hook up a brake controller, can't really go wrong with this kit. We've use this on a ton of different vehicles. It works out pretty well and everything else. Now, as far as getting it installed goes, not gonna lie, it's time consuming. Nothing really too complicated about it per se. Just running wires and everything just takes time. And as long as you stay focused, you really shouldn't run into too many issues. But speaking of that, why don't we go ahead and get this hooked up together now. To begin our installation, we're gonna be here at the back of our van. First thing we need to do is mount up our 7-way connector, which is this here. And with this, I just used a no drill short bracket to clamp it around our hitch, then connected the included bracket and 7-way connector plug here to it. And once you got that screwed down, we can get the wires hooked up that come off the back of it. So here's where the wires come off the back of it are. One of them is going to be a 4-way flat type connector, and that's going to plug into your existing 4-way flat wiring, so that'll just plug right into each other. And then you're going to have a black wire, a blue wire, and a yellow wire. Yellow wire we're not going to be using, that's for our reverse light circuit. So I just tape that up just in case we ever do want to use it, but I'm not going to worry about that one. The blue wire is going to be our electric brake output. Black wire is going to be our 12-volt auxiliary power. And so I took our duplex wiring here, the big roll of wire that we get, strip back the insulation on each end, and use butt connectors to pair the two wires together. Then that leaves a white wire coming out of our 7-way connector. That's going to be a ground wire. And with that one, I simply just use the provided self-tapping screw to run that up into the frame rail, to provide us with the necessary ground there. So once all that's done, you know, obviously you can come back, tape everything up, kind of secure it and whatnot. But once that's done, you can take your duplex wiring and start to run this towards the front of our vehicle. So I went ahead, got our wiring ran up towards the front of our van, and I just ran it along our frame rail here, doing your best to avoid any hotter moving parts. And you can just secure it along the way using some of these zip ties. So essentially just a straight shot, more or less all the way up to the front. See kind of where it comes out there. And it goes just on top of that heat shield, obviously away from it, but above it. It comes out here, then goes up into the engine compartment. And the way I got it up there, I dropped a piece of tubing down from the top. So, or you can use like a coat hanger or something along the lines. Tape your wire to it, go back up top and pull it up into position. So now in the engine compartment, our wire comes right up, and then I have it separated. So obviously you cut back that gray sheathing and you got a white and a black wire. White wire runs over towards the driver's side. We'll get to that in a moment, but for now the black wire, that's going to get ran to a breaker, which I have mounted up right here. And you'll have a 20 amp breaker, which is this one, and then a 40 amp breaker, which is this one. The wire that's coming up from the bottom of our vehicle, that's going to go to the 40 amp breaker, the silver post. So you'll crimp on a small ring terminal over the silver post, tighten the nut down with a 10 millimeter. The 40 amp breaker's gold post, you're just gonna take maybe 8 inches of that wire, crimp on a small ring terminal, a large ring terminal on the other end, tighten it down on the breaker, and then this eventually is gonna get hooked up to a power supply right here, but I wanna get everything else hooked up first. As far as the 20 amp breaker goes, the gold terminal, you're gonna do the same thing as a 40 amp, small piece, large ring terminal, small ring terminal. This will go to power as well. Then the wire coming off of the 20 amp breaker, coming off of the silver post, that's going to need to get routed inside of our van along with that white wire. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we did that now. So here's our wires running into the firewall inside of our van. If you move the coolant reservoir out of the way, there's just a few bolts holding it in. Pop them out, thing slides right on out of the way. You can drill a hole into the firewall, which obviously pay attention to where you're drilling. You don't want to drill through the back side of it and drill into your computer or harness or something like that. So pay attention what you're doing. And then I used a rubber grommet to pop in there to keep the wires from rubbing up on bare metal. And once I had that complete, I was able to take our wires and simply fish them inside of the van. So inside of the vehicle now, underneath the dash, this is where our wiring comes through. And this is going to get routed essentially to the center console and up. There's a small compartment that's going to be right above your radio. And so if you just kind of feed the wires along here and up towards the top of the dash, we can show you the little compartment you can pull out to reach down in there and get your wires. So this is the compartment I was talking about, and with this it just essentially pops out. Sometimes you can take a flathead or a butter knife or trim panel tool, kind of pop behind there, release those clips. This will pop out, and then you're going to have this clip, which is, or I'm sorry, this connector plug, which is our plug for our brake controller, which we will be using that in a moment. But here's our 2 wires. So like I said, I was able to reach down in here and grab them, pull them up. And these are going to get connected to your brake controller plug, which at this point, you know, with the exception of hooking up our power wires, at this point, this is where you know, the install more or less stops for the universal brake controller install kit. But with that said, obviously you're not going to get to this point and then not finish hooking up your brake controller, right? So from here, this is going to be very similar regardless on what type of brake controller you plan on using. But what you're going to do is take your brake controller adapter plug. So they actually make them specific for our vehicle here, and with this particular one, it just plugs in to that. And the reason we still had to do our ETBC7, our kit there, was because from the factory, this is only providing us with a ground and a brake light, stoplight switch, brake signal, more or less. We didn't have power, or brake controller output. That's why we had to run all these wires. Sometimes you can use, find at least power, which would be this black wire here, but you can look in the fuse block. You might have to pop a fuse in. Sometimes it's not slotted to be able to do that. And then if you're still going to be running one wire anyway, you might as well just do them both, because there's really no difference in labor. So with that said, since obviously these aren't getting plugged into our other end there, I have the end there, our blue wire and our black wire from this end hooked up to our brake controller install kit wire. So black goes to black for 12-volt power, and blue goes to white for electric brake output. The other wires coming off, the red and the white one, can utilize the factory plug there, plug that in. White will be your ground, red will be the brake signal. So with that all done now, what we can do is find a spot and start to set up our brake controller. So what we did was mount up our brake controller box. It's a little tricky to see, but it's this red piece around here, and there's a big bracket. This is under the dash, by the way, that the panel literally just pops out. You pop this off. But the way this works is it went around this bracket and around this big wire loom and zip tied it up, and it is not going anywhere. That thing is solid. So that leaves you with this phone. It's kind of like a phone, old phone cable, old phone cord. One end of it plugs into you know, the side of your brake controller, and then this end is going to plug into the switch or the knob that we got to mount up. So I feel like the knob, a good place to mount that is somewhere in this area. I'll figure that out and we'll kind of go from there. So here's where I mounted up our button. I think it turned out really well. Behind here there's actually quite a bit of space, especially with that lower panel down still. You just use the plastic trim ring as a guide, more or less. You drill out a larger hole, drill out a smaller hole, put the trim ring on, tighten this down, and then just pop your button on there. And you know, obviously you want to line the button up accordingly, so that way, you know, in the middle is in the middle halfway through. So I've done that, but now that everything's hooked up, we'll go underneath the hood, connect our power wires, and then we can calibrate and check everything. Under the hood, went ahead and got these wires hooked on up, and I just use this power supply stud here, remove the nut with a 10mm, put these on over it, and tighten it back down. With everything wrapped up, it's a good idea just to test everything to make sure that it's working properly and all of our connections are good. So I'm hooked up to a test box. You can always use your trailer. Keep in mind though, if your trailer has any issues, could mislead you into thinking it's something you did wrong on the vehicle side. But that said, try our left turn, our right turn. I'll hit the manual override on our brake controller. I'll hit our brake pedal. Try our taillights. And we have that 12-volt auxiliary power in the top right-hand corner. And we know we're all good to go. And everything is functioning properly. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the etrailer.com universal brake controller install kit on our 2014 Ford E-Series van.